We got 4 big mistakes we saw this year.
It's Brian Preston, the money guy.
That's right, Brian. I'm excited to share this because hopefully if we can share some of the mistakes that we've seen people make this year with you, we can prepare you to likely not make these mistakes moving forward.
Well, look, let's not take away that this year, 2022, has been a very unique year in the fact that we've actually had a bear market. Fortunately, bear markets only come around typically around 2 times every decade, and we're dead slap in the middle of it right now.
So let's talk about what are these 4 financial mistakes and how can you equip yourself to know if you start feeling like you want to move in this direction, you can avoid. And the first one is probably no surprise, but I think it's going to hit close to home for a lot of folks, is going to cash.
By the way, this is an interesting one to bring up because everybody who's done this, they're like, wait a minute, I thought this show was the mistakes we saw. And right now you're feeling pretty good about yourself.
Worked out pretty good for me.
But I'm telling you, if we fast forward 5 years in the future, you're going to look back and go, wait a minute, why was I in cash? Because it is right now a very prideful moment that everybody who's in cash is probably feeling really good about the fact that all asset classes, it doesn't matter even what's perceived as safe like bonds, they've been struggling because of the rising interest rate environment. Stocks obviously have the volatility of a bear market. You're feeling really good if you did go to cash.
And you may be asking this question, like, are people really doing this? Well, the answer is yes. If you look at current cash levels of cash on the sidelines right now, we have just recently reached the same peak that we saw during the Great Recession. So the level of fear and fright that is present inside of investors is very similar to what we saw back in the 2008-2009 downturn.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, and I'll base this off of the dot-com bubble because I've been managing money since the 90s, is that Fidelity a long time ago had this great illustration. I hadn't been able to go track it down, where they actually showed where cash levels were versus the S&P 500. And it's amazing how from a behavioral standpoint, the hoarding to safety of the cash, the feeling, the perceived feeling of safety is actually the peak financial opportunity when people should be thinking about diversifying into equities because of that long-term opportunity.
Now, you may be asking the question, okay, guys, I don't understand. Why is this bad? I mean, you've already noted all major asset classes are down this year. So if I were in cash, I'm actually doing better. Well, we are in this unique moment in time, and you say this all the time, Brian, where right now what feels safe is actually risky and scary. And what feels risky likely is the safer place to be. And here's why we suggest that. Because we know that when markets turn, when the financial markets do recover, it often happens very quickly and it often happens very aggressively. We have this illustration that we show that shows, okay, what if I took $10,000 and I just invested it in the S&P 500 from 1980 all the way through 2021? So we're looking at a 41-year time period of just leaving that money invested. Well, we've heard this saying that compound interest can be the 8th wonder of the world. That $10,000 left alone fully invested over that 41-year period would have turned into almost $1.1 million by the end of 2021.
Well, also, I think it's, and look, I want to bring it back to this chart, but I think inflation is something that also has made 2022 unique. And the fact that everybody who's got cash, and look, I love even my own savings are getting close to 3% right now, but I also know that inflation is 8+% currently. So there's actually a loss of purchasing power over the long term. That's kind of a scary thing. And it's back to what feels and is perceived as being safe actually in the long term could be risky, because I do know, talking about investment assets, the spread, pretty much the same period of time, 1980 all the way through 2021, the spread between inflation and rate of return, meaning after inflation, was around 8.9% from some of the research we've done in other shows. Purchasing power is still preserved by being an investor as well as your long-term performance, but you can't miss those key days.
That's exactly right. The way that you get that 8% plus real rate of return is you actually have to be in the market. Because look at this. If you just missed the 5 best trading days in that 41-year period, 41 years of data, you just missed 5 days. Instead of ending with $1.1 million, you actually only end with about $676,000. If you miss the 10 best days, that number drops to 487,000. The 30 best days, only 176,000. And if you miss the 50 best days, in that 41-year period, your $10,000, instead of turning into $1.1 million, would only turn into $78,000.
Well, we know you can't choose when the best days are or when the worst days are. So the best thing to do is kind of just drive through it, always be buying. And that's why I think the next thing we can talk about is assuming, number 2 is assuming low returns are here to stay forever.
Yeah, we hear this all the time. Well, you know what? This is something different. This is something new. I know what the market did for the last 41 years, but this is going to be something different. And low returns, we better go ahead and buckle up and prepare ourselves, because that is what we're going to see moving forward.
And this all ties into recency bias. I think it's a human nature thing that we just automatically assume what has happened recently is just going to continue. We're in a new paradigm. There's all kind of different ways you can say this, but a lot of times you are creating your own traps to keep you from building wealth.
So one of the things that we look at and we talk about on this show often is that when markets do recover, they often recover very quickly. And we know that in the first month after the downturn, after a market hits the bottom, on average, the market recovers at about 15%, but not every market recovers at that piece. So we said, okay, let's look at what the best market after a downturn was, and then what was the quote unquote worst market after a downturn, where you can see while the average for 1 month is 15%, one of the best market recovers, you would have made 27% in that 1 month recovery. But even on the downside, even the worst bull market recovery, you would have still made 5% over that next 31 trading days.
Well, because when I think about investing, I think about expanding how long you can stay in that investment. You know, you do not want to be an investor in the equity markets unless you're walking away from that money for at least 5 years. The longer you can stay in something, the better. And look at this from the recovery standpoint. From the bottom of the market, 12 months in the future, the average is 44%, but there have been periods where it's actually 75%. Look at 24 months, 2 years in the future from the downside of the market, the average recovery is 63%, but there have been periods where it's right at 99%. Guys, the longer you can stay invested and be consistent with your devotion to actually staying invested as well as buying into the volatility, you will be rewarded.
But Brian, I can already hear the people saying right now, guys, I get it. You're talking about the past. You're talking about the last 40 years. You're talking about since 1950. You're talking about the past. This is different. And the predictions, the experts, the voices out there in the media are telling me something different. So why should I not be listening to those? And how do I not know that they're not right? How do I not know that we are going to see this season of muted returns moving forward?
I actually love that we actually took a little flavor of this. We actually, we had the team go out there and research and say, hey, what are the forward-looking next 10 years supposed to look like? And look at this. Research Affiliates thinks that over the next 10 years, we can probably expect 1.6%. Morningstar.
That's annual returns.
Annual return. By the way, that's less than what cash is doing right now. Morningstar, 1.6%. Vanguard, I want you to pay attention. Vanguard is 3.3%. JP Morgan is 4.1%. All of this sounds horrible for the long term. And I'm actually a little perplexed by it because we just showed on a previous slide the range of recovery. And there is this phenomenon that people don't talk about much. And it's the pluck effect, or if you want a visual, think about the rubber band, is that obviously when you have reversion to the mean, if we have a period of underperformance, I actually think that the silver lining in that is that you actually have a wind to your back, meaning that you're actually getting propelled with probably better than average performance based upon the numbers we saw in recovery. Because remember, the first year is over 20%. 2 years was over 40%. If you just, divided by 1, divided by 2, you quickly see that that's well beyond what the historical average is. But Bo, what is the historical average for the S&P 500?
What is so wild is if you look at this from 1970 till now, the S&P 500 is annualized an 11.1% rate of return. Let's think about all the things that we've seen happen since 1970. We saw sky-high interest rates. We saw double-digit mortgages. We saw savings and loan crises. We saw wars. We saw dot-com bubbles burst. We saw great recessions. We saw COVID. We've seen all of these things happen since 1970, and yet the S&P 500 still annualized 11% per year over that time period. So it's so interesting that these media heads, these researchers, these academics are recommending such muted rates of returns moving forward from anywhere as low as 1.5% to only 4% annualized.
Well, I have some thoughts on why, but before we do that, I wanted to basically go back in time because this is the next 10 years. This is 10 years in the future. This is what all these current, academics, institutions are predicting for the future. But let's go test what is the power of this if we actually went 10 years beyond, because we have the ability through Google and research to actually go look. And here's what I think is interesting, and there's a reason I highlighted it. Vanguard every year comes out with these restrictions. I've created so much content saying this is a bunch of hooey. Don't pay any attention to what these guys are telling you because they ring the same bell over and over again. And here's what I do know. If you looked at the predictions of what Vanguard was saying, you could count on an annual basis this is not 100% equity. This is a 50-50 portfolio, meaning 50% equities, 50% bond portfolio. Vanguard said back in the 2011 period that you could count on about 5.5% per year. So from 2012 to 2021, 5.5%. We have the ability now to go look back and say, were they right or were they wrong? And guess what? Amazingly, it's very close to the average that Bo just showed you on the previous slide. And this is, by the way, this is a 50-50 portfolio. So that means that the equities actually were well beyond probably that 11% that we showed you. It was 9.6% annualized performance with 50% of your money in conservative bonds and 50% in the equities marketplace. Guys, these predictions are not that valuable. And Bo, before I give my why, do you have some additional thoughts on why they do this stuff?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is when you think about, okay, well, Vanguard, they got this so wrong 10 years ago. Why are they saying the same thing over again? And I think it's probably because of human nature. It's the way that we respond to negative information. If Vanguard says, hey, I think they're going to be lower rate of returns moving forward, and things turn out better than they predicted, nobody's upset at that. Everybody's happy. When the weatherman predicts rain and it does not rain, everybody celebrates. However, if they were to be too aggressive and say, we think that over the next 10 years, the market's going to return 10%, and maybe it is muted, it only performs 8% or 9%, people will be very upset about this. So I think it's a little bit of protecting career risk by these big institutions, that it's better to set expectations low when in reality we can see time and time again things turn out better than what was predicted in days gone by.
You just described it, but I'll put some fun terminology because this will also create a fun game for everybody out there in the audience to do. I call this the weatherman effect. And the fact that and by the way, weather is even harder here in the state of Tennessee than it was when we lived in the state of Georgia, because at least in the state of Georgia, you just asked your relatives in Texas what was going on in their weather, and you knew like 3 days later it was going to be in Georgia. But here in Tennessee, we have all these mountains and hills. It does all kind of strange things. But here's my challenge to you. I don't know, because I imagine the first meteorologists, they were just doing 3-day forecasts.
Sure.
And then some person in that community said, you know what, the people love the 3-day forecast because they can plan. So they went to a 5-day, and then the next competitor said, 5, that was great. What about we do 7 days? And then you can see how this progressed, where we had 10 days, and now I think you can even go and find a 14-day weather forecast. By the way, they don't really know 14 days in the future. So here's my thing that I want you to play a game with when you see these big predictions on weather, is that if you always look the 10 to 14 days in the future, it's usually rain. They're going to tell you that it's good. So that way, exactly what Bo said. As you get closer, since they don't know, they're going to give you the negative information so that as you get closer and the things improve, the forecast actually improves, you're like, oh man, this is great news. Nobody is ever mad at you for overperformance on your predictions. That's why these institutions, that's why I tell you, Vanguard is full of hooey when every year they come out and they tell you 3%, 2%, 4%, because over and over again, they exceed their own estimates. It's just career protection for these people making the predictions.
All right, so we said that one of the mistakes we saw was folks going to cash, and then the other mistake that we are seeing presently is people assuming that low returns are here to stay. Here's the third thing we saw really interesting this year, and it's people using too much of their house as an asset. They're counting on the value of their home too heavily when it comes to marking out and strategizing their overall financial plans.
Now look, it's interesting. I mean, it is one of those things. I am old enough that I was here in the 70s and 80s when we had the last big inflation jump. But I didn't own a house. My parents owned a house. I used to think forever, because my parents, I remembered in 1978, they built a house for $60,000. And I can remember when I graduated college and my portion of the rent, this is going to sound laughable because this is how old I am. It was like $450 a month was my portion. I had two roommates and my portion of the rent was $450 a month. Meanwhile, my parents' mortgage was like,
less than that.
It was like $300. So I mean, I remember thinking, I remember when my parents, a neighbor built a house in their neighborhood and they were like, they whispered it in whispered tones. Their mortgage is $1,000 a month. So it is so funny to me to live through this inflationary period because I do think a lot of people have had a huge run up. If you look at the chart, look at this hockey stick. Since 2000, you can see there's been a nice walk up the mountain with homes appreciating really kind of with inflation. Yep. But then you get to 2020 and you see it truly is a hockey stick where from 2020 to 2022, it's about a 41% increase. So that obviously created a lot of opportunity for people to feel really fat and happy with how wealthy they are based upon their house appreciated. And Bo, we even found some research that showed a lot of people did cash out refinances.
That's exactly right. What's really, really interesting is if you look in 2021, out of $2.7 trillion worth of refinances, $1.2 trillion of those were cash out refinance. That's the most that we've seen since 2005. Because remember what happens is when we have a levered asset, it's not really our money, it's borrowed money, but then all of a sudden the price increases overnight 41%, and it's like we won the lottery. All of a sudden we have access to capital that we've never had access to before. So people start thinking, oh man, you know what I can do? I can now do a cash out refinance and I can go put in that pool, or I can go buy that secondary residence, or I can go upgrade those automobiles. And we have seen this happen over and over and over again. And people are making some questionable decisions in how they're using that home equity.
Well, I think it's interesting in the fact that, first of all, your house, that your primary residence is a use asset.
Yep.
This is something that it's the shelter for your family. It's the security for your family. But I'm not mad at those people that did the cash out refinance, because right now they're probably feeling really good because they went and took a mortgage at 2.5% to 3.5%, and they were able to pull that money out. So maybe it worked out well for them. But for all of you that are sitting on this 41% more of home equity, the good days, the time is probably, the buzzer has rung, and the fact that interest rates now are over 7% on mortgages. You're not going to go be able to do that cash out refinance like your neighbors did this in the same way. So you need to make sure that you're not looking at your annual net worth statement and feeling all frothy and happy with yourself and your net worth when it's something you can't even get access to without selling the house. And in this market, that's actually a harder thing to do because you have to move to a new community so maybe you can get into a reverse situation where maybe there is a lower cost of living, but that's going to require you to move and sell, and that's a hard pill to swallow.
Yeah, what's really interesting, Brian, you mentioned how mortgage rates have risen, how they've climbed. Right now, this present moment, refinancing is at a 22-year low because rates have moved up. Here's what we're nervous about. it does not seem as though home prices are declining rapidly. Now, they may be declining in some unique markets, but a lot of folks still have a substantial amount of home equity. What we're concerned over is right now, 7% sounds like a really high mortgage rate. But as time moves on, even if mortgage rates settle down, you're going to start thinking to yourself, man, okay, yeah, you know what? I've got my low 2.5% mortgage, but maybe I can go get that home equity line. Maybe I can go take out that line of credit. And yeah, 5% is higher than it was, but man, I've got that equity I can tap. Be careful using your use asset to go expand the rest of your life. You don't want to take on more debt to increase your lifestyle simply because you can. Just because it's there does not mean it's something that you should use.
Well, and I want to give a cautionary tale on mindset too, is I think a lot of people with this big run up, I don't want you to change your behavior or just to slow down your desire to save and invest, because I'm worried that
I'm rich now.
Yeah, a lot of people are going to look at their annual net worth statement. They had that huge 40% run up on levered assets, so it's multiplied. It has an exponential factor, and you feel like, hey, maybe I don't need to go max out my 401k. Maybe I don't need to go fund the Roth IRA because look, I got $1 million sitting over here in my house. That might be a little bit of a mirage in the fact that, remember, you have to sell that use asset to get actual access to be able to retire or use that money. So I don't want you to have some false sense of security where you slow down the behavior of true wealth building, which is saving and investing, turning a little bit of what you can actually earn into net worth, because that is a big part, that discipline of living on less than you make, investing that through a disciplined life, and actually building wealth that works for you while you can sleep, while you do vacation. Your money's going to work harder for you than you do with your back, your brains, and your hands, and you don't have to sell the house.
So, Brian, it's interesting. The things we've talked about so far have felt pretty good right now. You know, going to cash, oh, okay, I feel good. Or my home has really increased in value. Okay, I feel good. Or, okay, maybe future returns are going to be lower. Okay, I don't know how I feel about that. The fourth mistake that we've seen people make is perhaps a little more painful. And I think a lot of folks got a very painful education over this last year. And we've just called this drinking the hot dot Kool-Aid.
Oh, yeah. You know, as you burst through, and the Kool-Aid drinking, and what's so funny is I've gotten to the age now where I can kind of spot, man, I don't know if that's going to age well, because we were talking about it in show prep. Do you remember, my community down in Georgia, literally on my drive to work, there would be 3 people out there spinning the gold, the pawn shops, the cash for gold, and all those type of things. And that was a trend. Somebody made the offhand comment, Beanie Babies and stuff like that. But it does feel like the past year and a half to 2 years, we had some unique things between cryptocurrency, NFTs, SPACs. A lot of people really were getting distracted on some things and they really weren't understanding the difference between investing versus speculating.
Yep. And what's really interesting is we lost sight of the things that we know to be true in investing because we got so enamored by the glitz and the glam and the meteoric rise. We just want to show a really easy money. Easy money.
Cut the edge off the corner. We always love a good shortcut.
Yep, that's exactly what it was. And so we have a really easy example here. If you look at the total return of the S&P 500 and the ARK Innovation ETF, this was huge. It was in every major headline because of how well this fund had done since 2019. But if you look all the way through November of 2022, total return of the S&P 500 over that 3-year period roughly is about 60% total return. Total return over the ARK Innovation ETF, because of what has happened this year, only about 1% total return. Now, the path looked very different. I think what people got caught on is the path. But if you're someone who got out above your skis and said, you know what, I'm riding this thing to the moon. I don't need to think about fundamentals. I don't need to think about prices. I don't need to think about cost. I'm just going to think about the green that I can earn. there's a chance that it's feeling pretty painful right now.
Well, I want this to be an educational moment because I think, look, there's something that says that Kathy's not going to be able to have another feast or famine moment where she like a phoenix comes out of the ashes and actually has some good years in the future. But I do think from a behavioral standpoint, the cycle of market emotions and understanding the difference between speculating versus investing is that you do need to pay attention to, why are you actually doing this? Is this money, as we like to say, it's like vacation money? It's like this is for the fun of it. This is for, instead of going to Vegas, you're going to go buy some of these high flyer type things. That's one thing. But if this is actually where you're trying to put your Roth money or your first investment, that's not investing, and that's probably getting the financial order of operations upside down. But from a behavioral standpoint, here's what I thought was interesting. I can't even remember the shows we were doing because Daniel went and pulled actual comments on our YouTube channel that mentioned this ARK Innovation Fund. And the first one came in 2 years ago from Mr. Stinky. What did Mr. Stinky say?
Mr. Stinky said, "I'm not worried about fees. Overall performance is key along with tax placement. I've been invested in ARK funds and performance greatly outperforms its fees, and account placement makes the active trading not a worry." This is on the ride up the mountain. Now remember, ARK in that 2-year period, it went up 350% since 2019. So as it's going up, Mr. Stinky said, "I don't have to think about the fundamentals. All I need to worry about is how much money I'm making."
Well, this is the overconfidence. He's obviously feeling really good. Who cares about fees when you're making this much money? And then look at this, Angelica Farm. I don't know how we got this comment. I'll give kudos to Daniel. He went and pulled Angelica Farm exactly on the tippity top day, posted a comment on our YouTube channel that said, "Add ARK investments to your repertoire." Is that big? That's the tippity top, the maximum point of financial risk was the day that Angelic Farm put that comment.
And if you would have read this on that day, you'd say, "Oh, I've never heard of ARK investments. So let me go Google that." And you look at it, and you see that it's up 350% over 2 years. You start thinking, "Oh man, this is something I got to get on. I'm missing the boat." You can change out ARK investments with NFTs or with cryptos or with whatever the hot dot is. And if you follow someone else's advice who's saying it's the thing that you ought to do because somebody made a comment on a YouTube channel, then perhaps you're not thinking about your investment strategy the right way.
Yeah, I mean, and then you can see this continued on. We had, as it started coming down, people were still saying, bravo to ARK Invest, 100% stocks, ARK Invest, and talking about it. I just don't want people to get distracted because this will come again. As you have more and more time as an investor, more and more time of building wealth, you're going to find that they're distractions. And this is how everybody wonders when Warren Buffett writes his annual letter to shareholders. He says the exact same things, but he just puts a different metaphor. He puts a different analogy on it, but he teaches the exact same thing over and over. And the reason is because this is all consistent. And I just don't want you guys to get distracted by the next thing that comes along. And who knows what it will be, but there will be something in the next few years that will be a tremendous distraction. They'll say, hey, instead of buying into that index fund that consistently seems to generate long-term performance because it's just tied to the success of the overall economic expansion of America and the world and just human nature's desire to keep building and growing, that's what I think is actually going to build wealth, not these distractions. So just make sure you get the order right and you know what the difference is on the things that you're counting on for retirement versus things that you're just doing for fun, like speculating.
Building wealth is surprisingly simple. It's not an overly complicated process, but it's not always easy. And one of the things that you have to do is you have to train yourself to avoid mistakes. The 4 that we talked about today were going to cash when things get scary, or not really understanding the true difference in risk and reward. Beginning to listen to other people, whether it be financial media or other peers, telling you what you should do with your dollars when you know historically what has worked steadily over time, or getting caught up in the froth, thinking about if you are someone who benefited from the run-up in housing prices and allowing that to ultimately change your financial plan, you should start to be worrisome, because when you have a good plan in place, it should be good yesterday, it should be good today, and it should be prepared to be good tomorrow without you having to make these wild swings to one side or the other.
I know that we're constantly picking up new subscribers, new viewers, new people listening to the podcast, and I say welcome to every one of you. And what I'm hoping you're hearing is that we are so consistent with our message that you're actually like, man, I can't believe, and these guys are just giving this information away. That's why I love that so many successful people actually consider us the go-to source for a lot of their information, is because you're going to find that we are different. We live in the most innovative, technology-driven world ever, and it's created incredible opportunities to be an investor at super low cost and for you to do more and more stuff from a do-it-yourself manner. But I also know it's a period where you can get easily distracted because there's so many information sources, there's so many distractions, that we're hoping that we're your guiding beacon to get you to the maximum version of yourself financially, where not only are you maximizing the finances, but also the fulfillment of what money as a tool can do for you and your family. We call this the abundance cycle. It's learn, apply, grow, that you reach a level of success from our investment in you that you decide, hey, you know what? I need a co-pilot. I need a personal CFO that will help me figure out how to make the best decisions. And it's okay if you're at the beginning of this. Like I said, we get new people all the time. I want you to absorb all the free content we give, but you're going to get even more curious. That's what I love about knowledge, is that you're going to get addicted to this idea of saving and investing for the future. And we have tools that once even the free stuff's not quenching that thirst, go check out the tools. We love doing the annual net worth statement. So we have a net worth tool that you can go find. We have Know Your Number, because after you get the net worth and you start accounting and watching that invisible hand make your stuff get bigger, you're going to say, I need to know what I'm saving for. And that's your Know Your Number course. And then, of course, we have the financial order of operations to maximize everything. It's all at learn.moneyguide.com. But if you are on that free side, go to moneyguide.com/resources, download all the free stuff you want. We'll keep you plugged in. We'll keep you undistracted from the noise out there. And we're going to make the abundance cycle help you maximize all opportunities. I'm your host, Brian Preston. Mr. Bo Hansen, Money Guy team, out.